Live here. We're going live everywhere. All right. We are now streaming on Facebook Live at Hyannis Country Garden, and you all are starting to join me. So welcome, everyone. As you come in, if you have never been on one of my Zoom presentation happy hours or Sunday seminars before, let me know. Type it in chat, and you just open up that little speech bubble at the bottom or the side of your screen, and you can type in chat. You can direct it to me or to me and everyone. And I would love to know if, what's in your glass, if you have a beverage with you. I wanted to show you this lovely glass that I have. This is a glass of white wine, but it is garnished with a tulip petal. And many people don't realize that tulip petals are edible and delicious. Now, of course, you want your own organically raised tulips. These are my own organically raised tulips, and I will put that aside for after the webinar. And I also have here, of course, a glass of water for if I get parched. So, so let me know what's in your glass. And as I often say, it doesn't matter whether you are drinking water or tea or coffee or wine or a cocktail. What matters is that we are here together, and we are going to have a relaxing hour thinking about plants and getting excited about container gardens tonight. So we are going to wait we usually get officially started at 1 or 2 minutes after 5, because this is billed as a 5 to 6 happy hour, but I like to open up the link a little bit early so that I can, make a little contact with you and find out if you have been with me in the past or if this is your first happy hour. And Linda, I'm glad that you've got an iced tea in your hand. It sounds refreshing. Jane, welcome. This is your first happy hour with us, so welcome. And Caroline is joining us from Florida, but she can't wait to get back to Cape Cod. And it was actually a beautiful day here on the Cape. And Ellen, I hope you and Bill are back or will be back soon, because this has actually been a pretty warm spring. So, it's a little bit unlike Cape Cod, except for yesterday, which was really like Cape Cod, April. So, I'm so glad to hear it. So many of you are chiming in about what's in your glass, or that you've been here before, or you've never been to one of my Zoom presentations before. And so it is great, great to hear from so many of you. We have 100 people on right now on the Zoom call. Of course, we may also have people on Facebook Live. I can only monitor one thing at a time. So it's going to be a fun night, because I can't tell you how much I enjoy container gardening. And there are several reasons, of course. Number one, container gardens can sometimes solve a problem, and we'll talk about that. Container gardens are a great place to bring plants to where you hang out. So if you hang out on a deck or a patio, containers are great for that. And containers are also wonderful for trying new things. You can try new plants, new annuals, and, just have fun with it. And as I often say at this time of year, all of these plants and all of these amazing flowers, it's like having a new box of crayons to play with. So we are going to get started in 1 more minute. We've still got several people joining, and I'm looking forward to it. Now, I'll repeat this at the end, but I want you to know 2 things, okay? Number one, we're doing a Zoom presentation on organic lawn care with Deeks. And Deeks, if you know Deeks, he is our organic lawn specialist at Hyannis Country Garden. He's been on Zoom before talking about this, and he will be live tomorrow at 1 o'clock. I will be there with him along with Martina, our marketing specialist. So we're looking forward to that tomorrow, Saturday at 1 o'clock. It is a free webinar, but you need to register on the Hyannis Country Garden page, events page. And then on Sunday, I'm talking about pruning, the subject that flummoxes so many people. It's a Sunday seminar, meaning it costs $10, and you can register for that on the Hyannis Country Garden events page as well. So I look forward to answering so many of your pruning questions, because this is a subject that flummoxes a lot of people a lot of the time. All right, so it is 2 minutes after 5. We've got 140 people on the call right now and climbing, and I say it's time to talk about container gardening. So let's share the screen, let's play the keynote, and here we are having a good time together and talking about planting and containers. Now, the first thing, of course, is to choose the right container, okay? And this is not it. This is a very nice little old box filled with little pots, and these little pots are pretty much good for nothing, right? Or maybe holding pens, or maybe one succulent for a little while, right? You want a container that has enough root room that your plant is going to be a happy plant. So, you know, whether that container is clay or plastic or wood, that doesn't matter so much, all right? It can be a used container. These are all my used pots in my seed starting shed. And at this time of year, I start taking them out and getting creative with what colors I want to use where. There are more and more good looking plastic containers being designed all the time. And that is a wonderful thing because they are lightweight. And so come in and take a look at those. We've got several styles in the store of all different sizes, shapes, colors. There's some pale green ones. And so it's nice that they are making better looking plastic pots for sure. And of course, the clay pots are always amazing. They come in so many variety of colors and textures. And there is a ceramic pot for just about every garden. And we'll talk a little bit more about the type of pots. It was interesting today when I was at Country Garden, a man had a question. He said he'd read online that it was better to place a plant, and I think he was growing a hibiscus, maybe a tropical hibiscus, but he said he'd read online it was better to place that hibiscus in a clay pot because it was porous and it would let the heat out of the container more. And I said to him, well, that's interesting, but that's something that applies not to us on Cape Cod. That might apply if you were growing that in a pot in Florida or Texas or Arizona, where it's going to get in the, you know, high 90s most days or even into the hundreds. But on the Cape, we don't have to consider as much the heat of the soil in our choice of container. There are earth boxes that you can grow things in. Most people use earth boxes for vegetables, and we're going to be talking mostly about flowers and maybe a little bit about herbs today. But yeah, earth boxes are a great container. You can make your own containers out of culvert pipe, right? There are metal containers. We've got several of those at Country Garden now. And of course, there are my favorite smart pots. Here we have assorted vegetables growing in smart pots. And smart pots are a heavy-duty fabric container that makes it possible for you to grow food just about anywhere. And you can grow other things in smart pots as well. Now, what I want to tell you about your container is don't clutter up the bottom with rocks or shards or any other nasty stuff. No mulch, no upside down flower pots, fill the whole thing with potting soil. If you need to fill the bottom with something else just to make it maybe a little less soil used, like if you have a pot that's 3 feet tall and you really don't need a 3-foot root system, then by all means line it with a smart pot so that the roots are contained at the top, and then you can put your empty flower pots in the bottom. But you want to be sure that the roots are contained so that they go down into soil. This is what roots do in a pot, right? They go around and around the sides and down to the bottom. And if you've got rocks or shards or any other debris in the bottom of the pot, that's where the roots end up, and it's bad for plants. And, this is an old practice that's really hard to kill. Something I learned as a new gardener, right? We were told that you put rocks in the bottom for drainage, but I invite you to look at every single plant that's in Country Garden right now and everyone that will be coming in from professional growers, right? All those thousands of plants that we have on the property right now, there is not a rock or a shard in the bottom of any of those pots because the professional growers know that it's bad for plants. And don't cover up the drainage hole, not with a screen, not with a paper towel, not with a seashell, not with a rock, all right? It's called the drainage hole because that's what you use for drainage. And again, look at all those commercially grown plants out in the garden center. There is nothing covering those drainage holes because the pros know that that's for drainage. So you want to fill that whole container with a good quality potting mix. And people often ask me, can I reuse from last year? If you want to reuse part of it from the previous year, dig it all out, put it in a wheelbarrow, take out any of the roots that are still in there, right? Chop it up so that it's loose and add some fresh potting soil to it. Because potting mix is really organic matter. It's made out of vermiculite, peat moss, perlite, maybe some compost. And because it's organic matter, it breaks down. All right. And the more it breaks down, the poorer your drainage. So your plants will grow better if you use fresh potting mix every year and dump the old stuff in your compost, mix it in with your compost so it's not wasted. If you want to recycle part of it for a year or two, go through that process of breaking it up and adding some fresh so that you have loose mix for your roots to grow into quickly. And don't cover the drainage hole. We said that before. All right. Here is my way of planting things in containers, particularly annuals. I wouldn't do this for shrubs or trees that are going to stay in the container for a while, but for annuals, it's a great idea to mix equal parts of a time-release synthetic fertilizer, Osmocote or Miracle Grow Shake and Feed, and plant tone. Now, why do you want them both? I'll tell you why. The time release, although it says on the labels it feeds for 3 months, when you're watering a container frequently and in hotter weather, usually those time release capsules release most of their nutrients between 2.5 months on, all right? Now, an organic fertilizer like plant tone, that takes about 6 weeks to become available to plants. So if you use that combination, some of the synthetic, right, the fast food, and some of the organic plant tone, then your container is fed all season long and you don't have to bother with liquid fertilizer. And, not only is mixing up that liquid fertilizer kind of a bother in midsummer, but also because it drains out the drainage hole, a lot of that fertilizer just goes out on your deck or out into the ground not into your containers. And so that's what I use. And of course, the amounts would depend on the size of the container. And you can read the labels on the synthetic time release for the size of containers, and then use, an equal part of plant tone and mix it in. And why plant tone? Plant tone, because for annuals, plant tone is a little higher in nitrogen, and annuals are nitrogen hogs. So that's a good thing. Now, if you're growing shrubs or trees in your containers, you would just stick with an organic, holly tone, plant tone, flower tone, any one of those, all right? And if you're growing vegetables, you will probably want to stick with an organic fertilizer as well. And you could mix in something like plant tone or tomato tone. And then if you need to, augment it with liquid like Neptune's Harvest. That's for vegetables. All right, let's talk a little bit of containers as problem solvers. Okay, number one, you can grow in containers if you don't have enough sun anywhere but on your deck to grow roses or tomatoes or whatever it is. Many people have shady yards, and yet one place that they often have sun is on their deck or on their patio right next to the house where they can't plant in the ground. Well, if you have a particular love for a special plant like roses, you can grow them in containers. You can also put a container in a place where there's basically cement and it's utilitarian, and you want something to distract the eye, such as on the driveway in between two garage doors, a perfect place for an urn, and you fill it with wonderful annual plants in the summer, and you put some branches there in the wintertime, or some cabbages and kale in the fall and pansies in the spring. This, I thought, was a brilliant way to hide an air conditioner, right? There's a nice little fence around there that hides that air conditioner, and yet it's still able to breathe. And then the area is dressed up with the plants in containers. And so those are what stops the eye and, stops you from thinking, oh, it's the air conditioner with a fence around it, right? Instead, you look at the containers and that charming arrangement. This is a garden out in P-Town where there was a tree in this one area, and it was very hard to grow any perennials or ground covers because the tree roots, are infesting the soil or living in the soil. I shouldn't say infesting the soil. That's not a good term. The tree roots are inhabiting the soil, and so the other plants don't grow. That is a perfect place for you to put containers. If you've got a maple tree that nothing grows under because its roots are so dense, put some colorful containers there. This is on my property, and I've got a place in my garden where the driveway stops and the garden starts, and that's a very hard transition there. It's not a real graceful transition. And putting a group of containers there makes the transition from the hardscape of the driveway into the softer plantings of the garden. And sometimes that's where we put our fig tree and assorted other annuals. Maybe you have a place that has a lot of mulch on it, and brown mulch is tidy. It's utilitarian. It is not particularly attractive. So dress it up with some colorful ceramic containers and annual flowers. I thought that this was brilliant. Cement steps are not particularly gorgeous. And the color is kind of dead gray of concrete. And so here again, a variety of colors of pots and plants that are growing that dress the whole area up. Again, a spot by a house where there's no ground to plant in, and yet it's a very, kind of plain area. Something like a rack to hold a collection of succulents, or a rack to hold some potted annuals really makes it look like it's finished. And how about your outdoor shower? If you've got a big enough outdoor shower that's got a bench on it, stick a container in there. It'll make you and all of your house guests or your grandkids smile when they go in. You can use containers to prevent people from falling off an edge. This was my deck when we first bought the house. There was not a step all the way around, as there should have been. And so until we got around to building that step all the way around the deck so that anyone could exit anywhere, containers prevented people from going off what was really too big of a step. That would have been a dangerous place for people to step off. Containers can provide privacy. Maybe you have a condo where you need a little privacy. This happened to be a restaurant in Martha's Vineyard. And of course, the people could be dining behind these planters and have some privacy there. And yet it's not completely closed off to the breezes, you know, and to the flow of the air in the summertime. So if you are planting summer annuals in containers, you want to pack them in. And that is because the season is short and, you know, you want them to look wonderful from the beginning of June into October. And in order to do that, pack them in. So combining several in a pot is a wonderful idea. They will all grow in together. I'll talk in a minute about some of plants end up, you know, not being as vigorous in the heat of the summer. And in this combination, you see this nice, lovely blue lobelia, where blue lobelia typically stops flowering once it gets hot in July. But if you've got it in with other plants, like the geraniums, like the salvia, like the gray plectranthus, those are all plants that love the heat. And so they will fill in and take over in the container. Here is a container that I did one year. These are all proven winners plants. And if you haven't been on a happy hour before, excuse me, let me remind you, sorry, let me grab some water, that you can take a screenshot of this on your computer. If you're watching on a computer, you can hold up your cell phone and take a shot of this if you want to remember these names, all right? Because this was a nice combination. We've got Evolvulus here with the blue. We've got Euphorbia Diamond Frost with the white. This is Cuphea vermillionaire, a hummingbird magnet. This is Sunbeanie San Vitalia, a heat-loving plant with sweet little yellow flowers. And here is the Portulaca, and all of these heat-loving plants. So this is how, this one right down here, that's how that container looked later in July. This was a year that I planted up using all those orange and yellow shades to go with the furniture and all on my front porch. And you can see that, you know, the Portulaca has really taken off in that container, as well as the Cuphea, and a little bit less so the Euphorbia. But that's how mixed containers are. They all kind of find their way. This is a container that we at Country Garden did for the Melody Tent a few years back. And it has the white Euphorbia Diamond Frost. This is one of the little accent plants, Alternanthera Little Ruby. Alternanthera Little Ruby. Then there's a Senorita Rosalita Cleome, a Scavola Blue Wonder that's going to cascade over with blue. We've got a purple leaf Dracaena there, and we've got a lime sweet potato vine that's also going to cascade over. Now, I use this to illustrate how the use of different foliage colors is as important in a container as it is in a garden. You can have an instantly gorgeous container by using some purple foliage and lime green foliage and green foliage together, and then the flowers are just gravy. Here's another container at the Melody Tent. This one with the Proven Winners Blue Salvia here, and some New Guinea impatiens, the nice lime sweet potato that'll cascade over. This is Snow Princess Lobularia, and we've also got the Euphorbia Diamond Frost. My friend Andy Aiken, who used to be with the Pleasant View Nurseries, he used to say that he viewed Euphorbia Diamond Frost as the secret weapon for containers because it kind of knits in with all the other plants and ties everything together with that pretty delicate white. So if you want a secret weapon for your containers, look for Euphorbia Diamond Frost. This is a lovely collection of containers and mixed plantings in a shade garden that I visited in Boston. And it was a mix of begonias, several different begonias, from the purple leaf Rex begonia here to all of these different begonias with yellow and orange and red flowers. And then this is the Garden Meister fuchsia back here. All of those are plants that do quite well in the shade. And this person combined them with some fiber optic grass and hackone grass. And I'm not sure which grass that one is, but all looks nice together with different colors, again, with some purple foliage and some green foliage. The purple oxalis, if you're doing a shade container, go for that plant. This is the purple oxalis, sometimes called purple shamrocks, although it's not really a shamrock. It is a fabulous plant in shade. It combines beautifully with the begonias. You can pair it with a coleus, or you can pair it with one of the yellow hackone grasses like here, and you've got a drop dead wonderful combination for a shade garden. This is in my troughs that are on my back deck, and I always have a king tut papyrus in the center of those troughs because they are like fireworks, and they wave in the breeze. It is the perfect plant if you live where there's a sea breeze. I always have Salvia black and blue and Coffea vermillionaire, because those are my hummingbird magnets. Hummingbirds love those plants. And in this particular year, I used a couple New Guinea impatiens and some wave petunias. The wave petunias cascade over the edge. And so I've got plants that cascade over. I've got plants that are kind of bushy in the middle. And then I've got something tall and fabulous in the center. Sometimes you hear these referred to as thrillers, fillers, and spillers. And this is why I love Coffea vermillionaire, right? The hummingbird works that plant morning, noon, and night. I try to have one on every container all around the house so that I have hummingbirds everywhere. Now, let's talk a brief minute about perennials and shrubs that stay outside in containers. You want, of course, containers that are either metal, plastic, or wood, okay? You don't want to plant them in a ceramic container. The ceramic will break. All of my ceramic containers that I plant with annuals get emptied out in the fall, and the container gets stored in the shed for the winter so that they don't break. You also, if you're going to leave a plant outside over the winter in a container, it needs to be hardy 2 zones colder from where you are. So here on Cape Cod, we are in a warm zone 6. Don't believe the USDA who claims that we're in a zone 7. We're in a warm zone 6. And that means that in order for those plants to live through the winter in a container, they need to be hardy in zone 4. That's because containers get about 20 degrees colder than ground temperature. So Hinoki false cypress are wonderful in containers. And here they are in metal urns, all right? so that they are not going to break the container. And hinokis are quite hardy in containers, as are dwarf Alberta spruce. I think those are my two favorite evergreens for a pot outside. You can grow peonies in pots. For years, when I lived in Osterville, I did not have enough sunny space to grow all the peonies that I wanted to grow. And so I had them in big plastic pots on my driveway. And during the winter, I pushed them up against the side of the house so that the snow plow didn't plow them under, and they overwintered outside beautifully, because peonies are hardy in, I think, a zone 3 or maybe even a zone 2. Now, if you have plants that are not very hardy, you want to pull them in a shed or garage. So those roses, for example, that you're growing a rose garden on your deck, those are not hardy 2 zones colder, most of them. And so you'll want to pull them either into a shed or an unheated garage to overwinter with a little protection. Let's talk about some great plants and plant combos, okay? Now, what you need to know always is that there are some plants that are wonderful and we love them, but they are best for early season fillers, not for flowering from May when you buy them into October. And 3 good examples of those are pansies, osteospermum, which are sometimes called Cape daisies, and they are those lovely daisies that are maybe pink or white with purple centers. Oh, they're gorgeous. And Calibrachoa, often called million bells. These are all plants that tend to, when it gets hot in July, they say, it's just too hot, I can't deal with flowering anymore, right? And so what you want to do is combine those plants with other plants that will take the heat. So for instance, in this pot one year, I had that lovely osteospermum and lovely pansies, right? But I combined them with lantana and petunias. And I think there's something else in the back here too. Well, maybe strobilanthes and another purple foliage plant. But I combined them with things that I knew would take the heat, so that then as the plant goes on into the summertime, you might lose those cool weather loving plants, but you don't have to worry about that because there are other things that continue to grow and do well. Here is a container. These are more osteospermum, I believe, right here. And we've got some evolvulus and some super petunias and various plants here. And I just wanted to show you, see, they're really packed in. They're packed into that container, but they do very well, all right, throughout the summer. Now, foliage only can also be beautiful, all right? So don't hesitate to create a container just with greens or greens and purple. One year I picked up, just assorted foliage of different colors and textures that appealed to me. And I combined them in this pot. And then that's how it looked later on in the summer when it grew out and started to cascade over. So, have fun with foliage as well as with flowers. Succulents and all of the grasses and the rushes. This is Juncus curly-whirly, and it is a lovely annual. We have it every year, usually in the proven winners section. So that can combine with succulents and assorted house plants. Sometimes you can even take pieces off succulents that you already have and mix them into a container. A quick word about herbs, vegetables, and fruit. They are wonderful in containers. You can, in bigger containers, you can combine several herbs together. If you're using smaller pots, I would certainly plant 1 per pot. Now, let me say something here about clay pots. Clay pots, I think, are very attractive, number one. The other advantage to clay or ceramic pots, some of the glazed pots, over plastic, is that they're heavier. And if you've got a bigger arrangement or bigger plants, you want heavier so that every time it's windy, they don't blow over, because that gets to be a nuisance. You can grow vegetables in all kinds of containers. This particular gardener made their own boxes and grew them in boxes inside of a fenced area. This was on top of a sand dune on Martha's Vineyard. So, you know, vegetables can be grown in boxes or pots. The bigger, the better for vegetables, however. And the bigger the vegetable plant, the bigger container you want and the fewer vegetables. So for a tomato that's going to get big, put one per pot in a big pot. Here's some chard growing in those boxes. Here's some eggplants growing in those boxes. Sometimes I grow pepper plants in containers. And here, you know, one pepper plant in the container is plenty. If you've got one plant, it will get bigger and you'll get more peppers. And there are so many peppers now that are as ornamental as they are delicious. This one was Sweet Heat, and it did beautifully on my deck all summer long. You might want to consider lifting your containers up, and there are several reasons to do so. Now, here is that pot that was planted, and it's got pot feet here, right? I have them on pot feet here to get them off the deck so that when I water those containers, it doesn't keep the deck wet and tend to rot the deck. Here is my back deck. Now, this is fake wood. It's not real wood decking, but still, it's better if they are up a little bit on pot feet, or you can use some small pieces of wood. You could string together several on a wire, several wine corks, you know, maybe 6, 8 wine corks, put them on a wire in a circle and put that under, and that would hold them up in a very, you know, recycle, upcycle kind of way. And, you know, they're attractive and the water drains out and better for your deck. And when I want to hose the deck off, you know, I can squirt water under there and clean the deck off very quickly. And you also might want to raise some containers either on upside down pots or on upside down containers, something else. So here I have these big green window boxes, and I have them on old green wire baskets because it presents them in a little more showy way, and it shows them off. It creates an instant base. You could put a pot on a clam basket. You can turn one pot upside down and put another pot on top of it. You play around with the stuff that you've already got in your garage and your shed, and you'll have fun, and it'll look wonderful as well. And before we get to questions in chat, I want to urge you to make your containers suit you. Do what appeals to you, okay? You know, what appeals to you might be a huge collection, you know, including very big pots and small pots. Go for it. Maybe what appeals to you is a simple whiskey barrel with an espaliered apple tree in it. You know, go for it. Maybe what appeals to you is a basket, a wall basket planted with succulents. Maybe what appeals to you is an annual vine like this cardinal creeper growing up a wire Eiffel Tower. Go for it. All right, so I'm reminding you all, tomorrow there is a free webinar at 1 o'clock on organic lawn care with our organic lawn care specialist, Deeks, and that's at 1. It's a free talk. And then Sunday, I am doing a talk on pruning demystified, cost $10, and both of those you can sign up on the Hyannis Country Garden website on the events page. So let's get to the questions. All right. And some of them I may, oh boy, some of them I may have already answered. Leek soup, Bruce. That sounds good. Okay. Let me go over all your beverages sound great too. And I think, Robert, I answered the question, can you use last year's potting soil? Yes, but you have to break it up and amend it because otherwise it's too heavy. Pot in pot, okay. So you can do several things for a pot in pot and why you would want to do that. Number one, if you have a plant like a canna or a fig tree, say, right? And you need to bring it into the garage for the winter time, you might want to have that in a nursery pot or a thin plastic pot, and then put that in a ceramic pot or a cement pot or whatever. The A looks better and B is heavier. So that's one reason to have one plant inside another. Another thing you can do is to put a smart pot, the fabric, inside a heavier pot. If you have a pot in pot, however, they should both have a drainage hole, all right? Don't put it in a decorative pot without a drainage hole, unless you are willing to, every single time you water, take the pot out, water it, let it drain really well, and then put it back into the decorative pot. Most people are not willing to take that time to do that. And if you're not, the plant is likely to rot and have problems with the drainage. A fine mesh on the bottom to prevent slugs from climbing into the pot. Don't do that. Number one, slugs aren't so much coming up through the hole, through the dirt. Slugs are just crawling up the outside of the pot. So it's not really preventing, sometimes they hide in the hole during the day because it's nice and moist and dark down there, but they're not going up into it. So don't cover the drainage hole with anything. Do you use Osmocote plant-on in the soil once the plant? Well, what you do is you mix those equal parts of the time release, either Osmocote or shake and feed and plant tone. You mix that into the soil before you plant. And then it's done. You've got it all mixed in, right? So that as the roots grow, there's no place where there's too much fertilizer and you might get root burn. And then it's finished and you're done for the season. I mean, that's the beauty of that mix, is that you don't have to fertilize all summer long. I feel like putting a tree in a container is sentencing it to death after a few years. Well, Donna, it's not all or nothing. You can grow it in a container for a few years and then plant it in the ground. That's number one. Why not stick to flowers? Well, the flowers, some of those flowers you're using, you're sentencing them to death because they die in the winter. Whereas if they were in the South, they would be perennials. So, number two, I would say, if you get 5 years of enjoyment out of that tree in a container, there is nothing wrong with that. There are times that we thank a plant for coming and we say goodbye. We don't save every plant in every container. We don't, all right? You don't save all your annuals and bring them in for the wintertime and then, take cuttings. We don't save all our plants. And so just, grow your plants with great appreciation for whatever time you have them, and thank them for coming. Or grow them in a container for a couple of years and then plant them, or give them to somebody who has a new house and will plant it. How do I feel about self-watering planters? I am fine with self-watering planters. A lot of them are too small, however, and so you don't really have adequate root room for what you're growing. That's number one. Number two, you still have to water them. They're not self-watering in that they don't turn on the tap and fill up their reservoir. You have to come and fill up the reservoir. And for many of them, you still have to do that every day. And so I guess I'm telling you the reason why I don't use any self-watering containers, because if I'm going to be watering them every day or every other day anyway, what is the point? Most of them are plastic also, so you have to make your peace with that. But I think if you, for some people, say, who are at work all day and want to be able to water every other day, it might be helpful, all right, and provided the container's big enough. And it might help people who are only on the Cape, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then they're someplace else. And so that might be helpful as well. Can you grow hydrangeas in pots? Yes, but you have to overwinter them in the garage, all right? But I grow several blue macrophylla hydrangeas in pots, not because I don't have the space for them here, but because, first of all, I like how they look underneath my grape arbor in the summer. They're beautiful. And second of all, I do it to show people that you can do it, okay? You throw them in the garage like lawn furniture. Here's the only tricky part to growing hydrangeas in pots. They, like everything else in the garage, your fig trees, your roses, whatever you've got in the garage, right? They break dormancy in March. And of course, it's far too early to put them out in March. So what I am doing at this time of year typically is on one side of the garage, my husband's car gets kicked out into the driveway. And on his side of the garage, I group all of those hydrangeas and the fig trees and anything else that has been overwintering and broken dormancy early. I group them by the garage door and periodically open the garage door, in early April, maybe only for 30 minutes. So they get 30 minutes of sunshine, and then I close the door again because it's too cold, all right? And gradually I introduce them to the real air and the real sunlight a little more every, week, so that then by the middle of May, I can put these plants outside and they're hardened off. So that's the only thing about growing hydrangeas in pots. You have to be willing to dance with them a little while where they aren't really out and they're not all the way in. Do additives that claim to hold the water and distribute it slowly work? Deborah, they do work for distributing it slowly. I'm not a fan because many of them break down into chemicals that I don't want to be putting out into the environment, particularly in an area where, we're right next to water on the Cape. So that's number one. Number two, if you happen to have a wet summer, they keep the soil too wet. So I'm not a real fan. Again, you could, if you're gone during the week, certainly you could try them. I'd read about the ingredients that are in them. There might be some that are a little more environmentally wonderful now. Explain again how would use a smart pot to line a deep container. Absolutely. Number one, if you have a deep container, like those troughs that I showed you that are back on my deck, right? They're livestock troughs and they're 3 feet tall. I didn't want to fill them all with soil. So in the bottom of that container, I turned upside down black plastic pots, like nursery pots, right? And filled with the upside down pots. There's still a lot of drainage, all around all those pots. And then I put big smart pots on top of that. And I filled the smart pots with the soil. The smart pots contain the roots. So done. So that's how you do it, basically. Do you have to worry about toxic materials of containers when you're growing vegetables in containers? Well, first of all, at smart pots, there are no toxic materials, all right? So that's number one. Most pottery is not lead-based glazes anymore, and most glazed containers aren't glazed on the inside, they're glazed on the outside, so I wouldn't worry about that. Might there be something toxic in some, maybe, I don't know, I can't imagine. I've never heard of toxic materials in pots, to tell you the truth. I've never heard that that's a concern. So organic or synthetic fertilizer for roses. You could go either way for roses in pots. You could go either way. And I would probably mix some organic in the soil when you pot them up in the pots. And then from year to year, use a synthetic. Will you be having a talk on hydrangeas? I've done hydrangeas several times. My next scheduled talk on hydrangeas will be a happy hour on Friday during the Cape Cod Hydrangea Festival. I think the date is July 9th. So that's going to be a hydrangea happiness happy hour. So look for that. Can a pumpkin be grown in a smart pot? Yes, but you want a big one, like a 25-gallon, the biggest one that you can, put wherever, because a pumpkin is a big plant and it needs a big root system. But yes, you can do it in a smart pot. It's a fun thing for kids that you can, park that on the edge of the driveway and grow a pumpkin. What was the plant on your deck that hummingbirds couldn't resist? It is Cuphea, C-U-P-H-E-A. I'm typing it in chat. Vermil, I-O-N-A-I-R-E. Cuphea vermilianaire. It is a proven winners plant. We will have it out in the proven winners section later in the summer. Right now, although we have some nice proven winners in our greenhouse, most of them, it's far too early to put them outside. It is far too early to be putting your summer annuals outside. You want the nighttime temperatures to be reliably above 50 in order to do that. All right, Jennifer said, what other plants do you have for hummingbirds? Well, hummingbirds, first of all, if you're looking for perennials for hummingbirds, definitely plant some bleeding heart. Both the old-fashioned, but more, I think, the fern leaf bleeding heart. And we usually, I don't know whether we have it in right now in our shade section of the perennials, but that is a good one. They also like Nepeta as a sun plant. The catmint, hummingbirds love Nepeta, so they will come to that. They like most salvias. So in terms of annuals, most salvias attract hummingbirds, and that Cuphea, of course. All right, is it too soon to cut the dead branches of the hydrangea? All right, if your hydrangea, this is an early hydrangea breaking dormancy year. We've had a warm spring, and I don't want to jinx it in any way, because if we get a frost now, which is not unheard of, we're sunk in terms of hydrangeas. But it's been a warm year so far. And so if your hydrangea should pretty much be leafing out. Normally that happens end of April and even into May. My hydrangeas are a good 2 weeks accelerated now. And so right now you should be able to look at all your hydrangeas and tell which canes have the green growth on them and which ones are either bare or the buds are black. If the buds are black on some of those canes, chances are that they're not going to do anything. So yes, you can go out and prune your hydrangeas. I might start on mine this weekend, as a matter of fact. And basically the only thing you do for your mop head or lace cap hydrangeas is to take out dead wood. You never try and make them shorter, because they will grow to be the same height in one summer. By July, they'll be just as tall, and you'll have a nice dome of green leaves on the top and no flowers on the top. So never make a hydrangea shorter. And if you have more pruning questions, I'm doing the webinar, the Sunday seminar on Sunday at 4 o'clock. It's an hour and a half. I'm going to answer all the questions. We're going to have hydrangea pictures as well as pruning other things as well. I received a daffodil plant for Easter. Should I store the bulbs in the cellar? No, plant them in the ground. Just because you buy bulbs in the fall doesn't mean bulbs get stored someplace without soil all summer long. Plant them in the ground, plant them in the ground. And a suggestion for part sun hanging plants on a covered porch. If it's getting some sun, even a little bit, all of the begonias, and there are some stunning begonias now, both cascading and mounding. And so begonias, I'd go with begonias. And of course, ferns. If you want to do a mixed hanging plant, I'd put some ferns in there, and any of the ferns that are in our front greenhouses, house plants, make good additions, and we sell a lot of small ones. You can tuck those in. The Algerian ivy, which is variegated and has big leaves, makes a good addition in a shady porch, and then begonias for the flowers. That would be a wonderful wonderful combination. All right, let's see now. I think we have pretty much done it with questions. Does anybody else have a question here? Easter lily, can it be planted in the garden? Yes, plant that Easter lily in the garden. Can you suggest additional tall plants for tall containers? Well, in addition to the king tut papyrus, all right, you can use the Proven Winners Cleome. That's number one. Well, there are a lot of tropicals that we sell as standards. Come into the garden center right now. We've got some gorgeous tropical hibiscus. There are usually standard hibiscus. You could use one of those. You could put a little obelisk in and grow a mandevilla vine up. Any of the ornamental grasses that are big, you can use in a big container. So yeah, those are just some suggestions. And the dracaenas, as they get bigger, you know, some of the dracaenas that you buy as house plants can be used in the center of a container for height as well. And some of the taller growing six-pack annuals like ageratum and the taller marigolds can be used in the center of a container. Let's see, somebody asked about a recording. This is on Facebook Live right now, and the recording should be there on the Hyannis Country Garden page. And then later in the week, Martina will launch the recording of the Zoom, which we're on together here. She will put that on the events page of the Hyannis Country Garden website. Easter lilies can be planted in the garden now. Can you talk about replanting Christmas cactus into bigger planters? You know, I would not put a Christmas cactus in a bigger planter. Did you know that in the wild, these are epiphytes that grow up in trees? They don't grow in the ground. They don't need a lot of root room. They're like this guy. This is also an epiphyte. They grow in the wild in trees. If you think your Christmas cactus needs repotting because the soil is old, pop it out of the same container, scrape off some of the outside roots and a bit of the soil, right? And put it back in the same container with a drainage hole and a fresh potting mix, because they don't need dirt. I mean, that's just basically kind of holding them in. I got a tropical hibiscus in a container. I brought it into my garage as it was too big to put inside my house. When should I take it back out, and what should I do to make sure it does well? You should take it out when the nighttime temperatures are reliably above 50. Usually that's the end of May, nighttime, okay? You should introduce it to the real light gradually, like I described that I'm doing with my hydrangeas. Give it a couple hours sun and real air one day, and then, you know, close the door again. And then fertilize it. If it's been in the container for more than 3 years, you'll need to repot it. I did a large lasagna planting in a large pot. Can you keep those bulbs in a pot till next year? Yeah, you want to keep that pot outside. You want to fertilize it as once those bulbs are finished flowering. And by lasagna planting, by the way, she does not, or he does not mean, she does not mean that it is edible, right? She means that she staggered some bulbs on top and some in the middle and some down below, so that you get like a spring garden, all right? And yes, you can get away with leaving them in the pot probably another year. After that, you're gonna have to plant some of them in the ground. And what you wanna do is once they stop flowering, leave the stalks, leave the old flowers, leave the leaves, and fertilize it, okay? Because then those bulbs are going to be storing up the energy for next year. And water them outside, you know, once every few days, and wait until the foliage naturally dies down. Once it naturally dies down, you can tuck that pot someplace. Don't put it in the garage where it's going to dry up. Tuck that pot outside, out of sight someplace, and then just leave it there and bring it in the fall. All right. Okay. Container garden potting soil. Well, I love coast of Maine. That is my favorite. I also like the Espoma organic potting soil, but those two I can definitely recommend wholeheartedly. If you don't have a garage, can you use a bulkhead? Yes, you can use a bulkhead. That's a little tougher to, open and expose them to some light and then close it down with many bulkheads, but you could certainly try that. For a fig tree, what should you do for them to get them ready for this year? Give them some flower tone. Fig trees like a more alkaline soil, so flower tone is a good fertilizer on the surface. And then a little bit of either earthworm castings or compost over that. Hummingbirds love the cardinal flowers. Yes, cardinal flowers, that's a great, and not only that, that's a perennial. So cardinal flowers is a perennial, and bee balm is another one that the hummingbirds love. And the cardinal creeper, which is an annual vine, the hummingbirds love that as well. Is there something smaller than King Tut? Yes, there is Prince Tut. And Prince Tut is about half the height of King Tut. It's not as graceful as King Tut, but it's about half the height. Oh, and you know what? The other great plant for the center of containers that gets about 3 feet tall is the Persian shield with purple leaves. That's a particularly wonderful one for the center of a pot in part sun or part shade. It can get a little bit burned in full direct sun. I worry about raising the center of gravity and using a pot of soil in the upper part of a tall, narrow container. I would worry about that too. If you wanted to make it heavier, you could put gravel or bark mulch in the bottom, and then again, the smart pot, or put a plastic pot in on top of the gravel or the mulch, and then it would be heavier. But no, you don't want to have nothing for, 1.5 feet in a tall container and then soil on the top. You're absolutely right. That's a prescription for disaster in the wind. Talk about Earthbox for tomatoes. Earthbox is one of the self-watering containers, all right? And you can plant 2 tomatoes in an Earthbox plus some lettuce or arugula or basil. And the instructions are all on the Earthbox about how to do it. And you keep the reservoir filled. You do have to pay attention to doing that, because even in an Earthbox, they will dry up if you don't fill the reservoir, and then you'll get blossom end drop. Can you put asparagus in pots? No, I wouldn't. You have to wait 3 years to harvest asparagus. It's not worth putting it in a pot. All right, we're almost out of time now. So how to get rid of bugs, that's a little too general because there are too many types of bugs. But I would say if you have certain bugs, bring a sample in and talk to Chris Stokes or Deeks in the garden center, and they'll give you a good organic treatment. Agapanthus, you can overwinter it in the garage. Yes. And in fact, that's a good place to overwinter agapanthus because they need a chilling period in order to flower again. The small orange tree doesn't seem to be growing well. What can I do? Look and see if it's root bound, and it probably needs a new pot. And it's 6 o'clock, time to make dinner. So thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing some of you as we talk about pruning on Sunday, or as we talk with Deeks about organic lawn care tomorrow. And I look forward, of course, to future happy hours talking with you here on Zoom and Facebook Live. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.